Hey adventurers, just a quick loot drop before we dive in. Full video episodes of side quests and save points go up every Monday on YouTube, split into handy parts just like a good set of side quests. But for you, lucky traveller, we are getting the whole adventure right now. No cuts, no checkpoints, just pure questing chaos. Welcome back to another episode of Side Quests and Save Points, the podcast where we explore RPGs, MMOs, and all the wonderful ways we choose to suffer for fun. I'm your host, Chef Monkey, and today I have a question for everyone. Have you ever played a game that drops you into a world with no hand-holding, no flashing quest markers, but basically tells you, good luck, figure it out, and don't die? Well, we've got the guy who made that happen. Joining us today is Guillaume Boucher-Vidal, CEO of 9 Studio and creative director, a developer who believes in trusting players to figure things out or perish trying. To join us today for a conversation about game development, RPG design, and some probably unexpected tangents along the way. Hopefully just a really good conversation with a developer who isn't afraid to challenge players and shake up the genre. Refill your tankards, grab your potions, definitely check your inventory twice, and let's get started. Welcome. Thank you for joining me today. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing great. That was a great intro. I feel like I've got something to live for now. I need to deliver.
Well, you certainly have delivered. Just checking some of Outward's stats before we started. I feel like they might be quite heavily outdated. Just did some Wikipedia
Tell me what
hunting.
you got. I'll tell you what I got.
Last week, just for some background research. In your podcast episode, you stated that at that time, which bear in mind was quite a while ago, was at 1.5 million lifetime sales. Yeah, have you got a ballpark figure where that is at the moment?
So we are currently in the process of confirming if we've passed the threshold of 3 million units sold for Outward. We've got a very long tail of sales for the game. So I'm just astounded that it just keeps getting out. People keep buying it over and over again.
So with sales like that, obviously you've got the original release, and then when you release Definitive Edition, does that count as a second set of sales?
So it's the combination of the Definitive Edition and the
Well, I account for
release.
4 of those sales then. I have it on PlayStation, Xbox, and the Definitive and the original release on PlayStation.
Well, thank you for your patronage. It's appreciated.
It's a very good game, and I like to play it with as many of my friends as possible. So just diving into a bit of history, I've browsed your AMA that you did on Reddit a while ago. You spoke briefly about it in the Biz of Video Games podcast. 9 was founded by yourself after, no offense, a very short time in the game development industry as a whole.
That's fair.
You were a QA tester for 4 years, I believe, with Activision?
3 years and a half.
3.5 years. What made you, or what gave you the confidence to be like, you know what, fuck it, I can do this better by myself?
Well, you see, the thing with me is I don't care all that much about whether or not I will succeed. I care about whether or not I give it a chance to happen. And it's a bit cliche, but it's a bit like Han Solo saying, never tell me the odds.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of conscious naivete in making that move, starting a business.
Yeah.
I think it's true for any entrepreneur. Like, as soon as you're convinced that you're going to succeed, you're kind of delusional, right?
Yeah.
But to me, it was just this idea of, if I'm to ever do it, now is the best of time. I was 24 years old. I didn't have a house to pay, like no mortgage. I didn't have children. And I felt that I was very appreciated at Activision. They kept giving me more responsibilities, and my wages were increasing steadily, way faster than the average. And so I was at that point where it would be dangerous to get more comfortable.
Yep.
What better reason to start doing something disruptive than eventually I'm just going to be bound to the level of comfort I'm at. And after just 3 years, I still remember what it's like to be a student, to have nothing, to live on ramens and bananas. And so
Nothing wrong with living on ramen and bananas.
nothing wrong with it. But it was just I knew I could get back into the discomfort. even though I was making decent money in a QA division, my life habits were still very frugal. I was
Yeah.
still conditioned by my students' years. And so I was just buying almost nothing, piling up a lot of cash. And so I had this opportunity and was like, yeah, it's starting to be just comfortable and it's starting to make me more numb to my own ambitions, to my dreams. And that was it. I had to make that jump. So, like, it's not so much confidence in succeeding, but knowing that it was a time to seize the opportunity
That makes
before
sense.
I'd lose that courage.
So you mentioned previously that you went to like the sort of the trade shows to try and recruit people for the studio. Evidently you were successful, but what did that conversation look like as a startup? Like how did you get them on board?
Well, the game industry was very different then than it is now. And especially in Quebec, Quebec City is a big game development hub. But back then, it was okay, but it was mostly servicing studios. And almost no one were making their own IPs. And it was just the most common thing was to be crunching for anything. And so the work conditions were not all that great. And nobody seemed to be questioning that, at least not publicly. And for what? Like, if you are to crunch on a game, it better be your own IP. If you're to sacrifice your soul, if you're to get on the verge of burning out, why do that for a licensed movie game tie-in, right?
Yeah.
And it's not that those projects were bad. It's not that the teams themselves were bad. It's just that the projects were not at the level of the effort that was poured into it. And also, it was so clear to me that it was not making the games better. I'm still bound by NDAs, so there are things I cannot say like on exactly how companies were working, but
Yep.
I can't give you just, I mean, it's been over a decade, so I guess nobody's going to sue me over this, but when I was working on a team doing QA for Call of Duty, Activision really, I don't know how they are nowadays, but back then I can't say with certainty. Activision cared about quality and they care about making sure that their games were not bugged. And they had those very arbitrary thresholds. So to make a game like as high quality as possible, they expected you to have like 40 testers at least working on it full time. It was like up to 16 hours per day. And the truth is, that was like that arbitrary threshold was just maintained for some executive power somewhere. But the truth is, when you have a build, maybe what you have to test in that build is kind of limited. And after that, like, sure, you're just checking around. But if you've received like 4 different versions of the same game in the week, and you're starting over and starting over and starting over, you are losing some time. Like, you could be making more fragmented types of testing. And like, okay, for this build, we've already covered all those issues. Now we're just going to focus on that different areas. But instead, they would just try to do an absolute full sweep of every version. And that makes sense if it's like a final candidate. But it doesn't make sense if it's just that, oh, we just realized that that build had this thing broken. We're sending you a new one. And then we're starting it over. Right? So it was just a very specific example that I know anyone who worked in QA can recommend. Like, yeah, of course. Of course they did that. They all do that. But that's just one of those examples of people were working like 72 hours a week for 6 months for reasons like this, for arbitrary numbers.
Yeah.
And there wasn't much pushback. So like people were just accepting that, and honestly, for some of them it was a good thing because you get paid overtime after 40 hours. So it was just making very decent wages, and it was a great team. Do you like the people? And they did not realize that they were actually burning out until it was too late. I remember a specific summer where like the crunch had been going for so long, and 7 people just kind of disappeared and nobody wanted to talk about it, but it was just like 7 people that burnt out and left without having even permission to tell the team that they were leaving. It's savage. It's savage. And there were people that were really core to the team sometimes. And
But
I even
now, so
remember
they had enough.
when I was a student in game design, I remember asking one of my teachers, do you believe that to be really impactful on the industry, to have the kind of careers that get noted, that really, like to become one of those legends of game development, are you supposed to really crunch all the time? I'm willing to do it, but do you think it's necessary? And the guy said, yeah, if you really want to become one of those big shots, you just need to put in the hours and show that you're working harder than everyone else. And that's how you get the results that make you renowned. He believed that, but I had this doubt in my mind that the accuracy of your decisions mattered more than the amount of things that you did. And I've been proven right. I'm not saying like that today that I'm not a John Carmack, I'm not a Hironobu Sakaguchi. I'm just me. But the kind of career I have nowadays and the kind of stuff that I'm doing is to the highest degree of my ambitions that I ever had. I didn't think when I started Nine Dots that 4 years later I'd start working on my own open world RPG. That seemed like absolutely inaccessible to me at the time. I got there just by making smart decisions and by protecting my mental health and maximizing my productivity per hour. And it turns out that if you maximize your productivity per hour, you maximize your productivity total more than by doing more hours, if that makes sense. Like 80 hours that are not as productive as your maximized 40 hours will never be as much work in total. And it's really funny because I did have to crunch a couple of times at Nine Dots, but nobody else ever did. I'm very proud of that. And when I did crunch, it was because of either I was doing a Kickstarter or trying to get some funding at the last minute, and it was just like a race before a finish line that I just needed to get there like as fast as possible for the company to survive. Or I was going to a trade show like PAX. So those are very specific timelines where you have no control over a lot of factors. But aside from that, like even for game releases, I never had to crunch. So that means that as a hybrid between a CEO and a creative director, I've worked less hours per week on average than when I was in QA.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it is.
But
it really
like
is.
you said, it proves that it can be done.
Yeah.
So with Nine Dots, I've always wondered, is there anything behind the name? Where did the name come from?
So initially, I wanted to call the company Outside the Box, just for the saying, thinking outside the box.
Outside the box, yeah.
I wanted, like, I'm not going to be like those other studios, right? So then I think that'd be a cool name. And then I looked to register the company name. And just in Canada, there were 600 companies with a game sounding like it or exactly that in different categories, like outside the box agency, outside the box blah blah, outside the box networking, outside the box web design, whatever. I was like, yeah, I want to be the guy who's thinking outside the box, and I've got like 600 other companies who think they're original and they're doing that just before me. Not that great. And so I just started trying to dig deeper. And I found that the origin of this saying, thinking outside the box, was a puzzle from one of those riddle books. The Nine Dots puzzle.
With 4 lines or something like that.
Yep.
Yep, I know the one.
Well, that's
that makes
the origin
perfect
of
sense now. That's made me appreciate the name so much more.
People often think that it's because we're just 9 people, but one, it's not true anymore. We're now like 30 people in the studio. But even then, like when we really got started, we were 5, and then when we made Outward, we were 10. And people were like, "Oh, only 9 people made that game." Just immediately associate the number with
the amount of people, yeah.
The size of the team, yeah.
So with Outward, how I've read, and feel free to correct me if this is incorrect, that the idea for Outward came because you were frustrated with games like Skyrim and Oblivion for not providing a multiplayer.
Not exactly. It was I'd say frustrated. I was frustrated not with just one specific game, but with the fact that there was no game in the RPG genre that offered the experience of being just a regular person. You're always the child from a prophecy, you're the dragonborn, you've always got this one thing that makes you so special. And I was pretty convinced that for most players of RPGs, this is not what we're looking for. I believe that the vast majority of people who get into RPGs, what they like is immersion, is to feel like they're part of a different world. And if you are this special superhero where everything is handed to you, like you're just being spoon-fed your adventure, that is less believable. That is less, it doesn't connect as an experience as much as going through the troubles that are relatable to a simple human being. And that was the initial premise. So it's not that like I love Skyrim, I love the Elder Scrolls, I love RPGs in general.
Yeah.
And I could not blame any one of them for not offering it. I was blaming creators at large for not having this specific aspect being offered. And so I thought, if I were to make an open world RPG, I want it to be like this. And this conversation kind of was getting very lively within the studio. Everyone had something to say on that subject matter. They all agreed that this was something that was lacking to the experience. And we were still working on the last update for God Factory, which was a commercial flop. And that conversation just kept everyone like in a very positive mood, just to think of that dream of what we'd be doing if it was us. And so I asked the question to our lead programmer, what would it take? I know you're going to hate me for even asking the question. What would it take for a team like us to make a game like this? What kind of compromise or whatever? And he just went silent. Like, he just started thinking. And conversation went on. And like maybe 5 minutes later, he just said, we could do it. Because he knew that the question I was really asking was not, what would it take? It was, is it possible? And once he said that it was, nothing would correct that course. If we can, we must. And then we start thinking, okay, how do we differentiate? Aside from just this promise, like what are the things that are lacking right now in this industry, the pain points? And the lack of split screen co-op was a thing that many of us agreed was lacking in the experience. And then I just remember saying, I would just love to be sitting on my couch next to my girlfriend and that we'd be playing together a game like Skyrim. It doesn't exist, and it should. And so we just decided to do it on top of like the fact that it was not possible for a team of 10 to make an open world RPG. And back then we were 6 actually. And we ramped it up once we got some funding. Yeah, within the first hour of even discussing making that game, the decision that if we make it, we want it to be split screen was a done deal. And it was by far the biggest challenge because turns out it's not just because of technical constraints that people were not doing it. There were also a lot of design decisions that were like all up in the air of how do you manage this specific instance? How do you manage this? How do you manage that? Like, how do you manage a conversation when there's another player who would like to be part of the conversation? How do you get out of this area when there's someone else who wants to be somewhere else and who's not ready to leave? How do you handle that one of them is down? Like, how do you make the raise you? If it costs resources and they don't have that resource, what happened? Like, there were so many edge cases. It's an explosion of difficult design problems that came with split screen and just co-op in general for a game like this. And it was not as simple as just looking at other co-op games and just apply that for an RPG. There are expectations, like RPGs have their own vocabulary, their own concepts that you need to follow. So I'd say we could have made the game with like half the time if it hadn't been in co-op. We could have made an open world RPG single player in 2 years instead of 4. But it was so worth it.
100%. So that's here. I think the interview's dated with yourself October 2023. Like you just stated, was extremely difficult to make it co-op, and you had to make heavy sacrifices to make it work. Was that just the design elements you were just talking about?
No.
Or were there other gameplay mechanics and stuff that you wanted to put in that you had to not because you were so determined to make this a cooperative game?
So there are a lot of complications when it comes to graphical fidelity. We wanted to allow the player to be untethered. So if I'm in one corner of the Chersonese map, we wanted the other player to be able to be to the other corner. And just allowing that without like going through extreme levels of optimization that would have required a lot of manpower to pull off. Like we needed to have the entirety of the region loaded in the RAM. Like that's how it works. And like we just load the entirety of an open world region in the RAM one shot. There's no streaming of content as you move along. And to do that, like we've got lots of restrictions on how the game can look if we want that to be possible. So that's one thing. And also, like, we've got split screen, but we've also got online co-op. And so that means that everything, every action you do has to be synchronized with another player. And so every single feature is more complicated, has more dependencies, has more. So, like, yeah, Outward is a janky game, and there's a lot of cut corners. But I'd rather have something that is rough around the edges, but that can do those things that no other game is willing to try, than to be an overly polished game that would still be compared with those other titles made by teams of 100 people working for 8 years. And so I'd rather be rough, but incomparable, right?
Yep.
And so in terms of positioning, it made more sense, but like a lot of people were calling me crazy. And I'm not saying they were wrong to call me crazy, but crazy does it.
Yeah. So I was playing online with one of my friends who lives in Texas, and I'd say unfortunate, but in this case, it was fortunate enough to come across a bug with Outward. I'm not sure if this bug still exists, but we just loaded in, fresh game, and behind the caravan trader in the starting area, there's the tree that you get the hatchet from, you can log. And my friend needed some wood, so I grabbed the hatchet, logged the tree, dropped the wood. However, as I dropped the wood, I don't know whether it was a server lag thing. It wasn't just 3 that dropped. It dropped a full stack of 999. And
That's weird.
we tested it out a bit, and we dropped a single gold bar, and it turned into a stack of 999.
What?
And then we tried to pick some up, and then we realized it was too heavy. So then we dropped some out of that, and then that turned into another full stack on the floor. So we gave up in the end. We grabbed what we could. I gave ourselves a decent start, but littered around the city is just stacks and stacks of gold bars.
I've never heard of this bug. I know a lot of people who were like swearing at the grind of the Caldera in the Three Brothers, like making their own town. You would have hit them up like, "Oh, you need money? Here,
Yeah, I
buy
got
a
you.
whole
No
town
worries.
with that money."
Yeah, so when it comes to the development of a game like Outward, or games in general, obviously you got the basic idea and all that sort of stuff. But where does it go from there? Do you get like the concept of the art done? Is it all developed simultaneously? Do you develop the story? What is the
So there is
process
how
in a
you
nutshell?
there's how you should do it, and then there's how we had to do it because we had no resources. So in our case, we had flopped twice. We started working on Outward and I had $0 in the bank. So we had to just like hit the ground running as soon as possible. So I started with first making a 10-pager document that really gave an idea of what is it that we're going to do in a very high level summary. I gave that to our lead programmer and to our art team, just so that they could start making sense of what were the things that they absolutely would have to do. And then the next step is really just like we had so little pre-production time, which is crazy, but we had a very strong vision. And I just very quickly started making the table of content of everything that we would have to do. So the most salient point is, what are your pillars? What is the list of actions the player can do? what are the most important systems and how do they distinguish. And like, if you take note of the things that you're gonna do differently, and then say, and then the rest is more familiar. Anything that's familiar is kind of, I'm exaggerating here, but it's kind of easy to do because you've got all those models of how the other games are doing it, and then you can kind of learn from that. If you're trying to do something completely new, like the magic system that we have in Outward, for example, well, that thing being very unique, there will be a bit more experimentation, and we need to spend more time thinking so that we spend less time making mistakes. And so that was what I was focusing on, was just think of all those things that we do so different. How does co-op work? What is the structure of a game that is playable in co-op? Drop in and drop out. What, like, to me, the most important aspect to creating a more simulationist aspect to an RPG was to deconstruct actions into more steps. And that's like, the magic system is the most obvious manifestation of that idea, but it applied to everything. It's not that you just click on a button and it starts like skipping night and you just have a cutscene of a campfire, right? No, it's just you go grab the wood. Then you set up your wood together to make a campfire kit. Then you deploy the campfire kit. Then you use your flint and steel to have some fire. Then if you want to cook, you place your cooking pot and then you deploy your tent. And then you go in the tent and then you choose how much hour you're spending for guarding, for repairing, and for sleeping. And then you do it. Like, that's how you camp. There are all of those small deconstructed steps. If you want to use even a basic melee skill, well, do you have rage? No? Okay, do you have a potion to induce yourself with rage? No? Do you have the skill? Yeah, okay. You need that skill, you need to buy it. It's not just gonna appear magically because you're level 9 or something. So it was just, how do we make it feel like it's not as automated as other RPGs? So that was one of the big thing that I had to figure out first. Then there was this notion that we want Outward to be about the life of an adventurer, not just the heroic action of combat. So how do we make the experience feel like it's more than just combat? And that's where the survival elements made sense. Like you're just going through the experience of travel, and that in itself should have its own mechanics. So that it's, when you think of RPGs, usually almost all the mechanics are essentially about combat. What are your spells for? Combat. What, like, any point that you put into charisma is kind of wasted. You should have more strength or more agility, you know? And if you do put your point, like, what's the point of the lockpicking perk tree in Elder Scrolls? Right? It's just, it's Skyrim. It was a legacy thing of the past, but mechanically, it's always felt a bit out there compared to two-handed axe or destruction spell or healing, right? And so we had to figure out all of those small elements that we care about more than just combat. And you know, a lot of people say, oh, it's a walking simulator. Some people love that aspect of Outward, and some people hated it, the fact that we're not just going to throw an enemy in your face every 30 seconds. That's also something that was a very deliberate decision. So yeah, that's how you get started. And then, like, for now that we're working on Outward 2, it's such a privileged situation that we started working on a game and we had like all the funding already and very little uncertainty in that regard. We already had a very strong prototype for Outward 2 called Outward 1. So we could skip all those steps. And the pre-production for the game lasted for months and months and months. So even though we had an easier starting point, we also spent more time getting our tools ready than just, you know, I think it was I think it was Lincoln who said, if you give me an hour to cut a tree, I'll just take the axe and start swinging. If you give me 2 hours, I'll spend an hour sharpening my axe and then I'll cut it down in 15 minutes or something along those lines.
The whole measure twice, cut once kind of deal.
Yes, exactly. And it's kind of what we're doing with Outward 2, like now we really could get everything figured out. Well, not everything figured out, but a lot of it figured out before we even start coding it. And so, yeah, it starts with just making a table of content and looking at like every single thing that you need in a game like that and just asking yourself the question, how does that play out? Play the game in your head. Does it make sense in your head? If it doesn't make sense there, why would it make sense as lines of code? It wouldn't. And I feel like a lot of developers seems to be skipping that step. Like they just think of it as we will validate once we can play it. And to me, it's just you should invalidate it as soon as possible, just in terms of thoughts. And if your thoughts cannot kill the concept, only then do you start putting it in code.
So you said previously that your target market for Outward was what you classified as a sophisticated gamer.
Yeah.
Is that a term you heard somewhere else? Is that something you sort of came up with yourself?
It's something that I came up with when I founded Nine Dots. It was just like that always was the audience for any of our games.
So is that what developed the mentality behind the game of the lack of hand holding, that here you are, get on with it?
Yeah. So when I think of the sophisticated gamer, it sounds very snobbish, right? But the point is more like anyone who's well versed into something will have very specific preference and will have some sensibilities that developed over time. If we are trying to target everyone, that's when hand-holding becomes necessary because you need to bring everyone to the same point before they can kind of go on their own. If we take for granted that the people who play our games have played games for 20 years,
Guilty.
then you come to a point where telling them how to do it insults their intelligence.
It's almost insulting, yeah.
Yeah. And so I was thinking everyone is already trying to cater to the smallest common denominator. Who is catering to us, to the very experienced gamers who already appreciate all those things and we want to get in the nick of it, but also who lived through the time when games were only explained in a paper booklet that came in the box with the game, right? And not even in the game itself. And there was just something so magical to this idea that you went to the game store and on your way back home, you would just like
read the manual,
hastily get the booklet and start reading everything so that you could jump into the game and right away you would know how to play it, right? So the point was to do that. And it's so funny because not a lot, but there are reviews that are negative about Outward that said the game doesn't even have a tutorial. It's right there. It's in the main menu.
Yep.
They just expected that if they click on new game right away, the game should just like give them everything. But you did not even take the time to read the options in your main menu, and you blame
100%.
us for not having a tutorial?
So I
What's
loaded
up
in
with
the
that,
game,
my man?
I loaded in the game for the first time, and after about 10 minutes, I backed out, played the tutorial, and then went back into it. So I got a question with regards to how the money works. So you said that you got rephrase that. Outward was made on a budget of roughly $2 million.
Yep.
How is that money spent? What makes it a $2 million game? Is it like, does that count for overheads and wages? Does it go towards the systems? Like how does that work?
I'd say it's maybe 95% going in just salaries. And yeah, the rest is just software and office rent. I mean, I was the only overhead expense, and even then, like I was directly involved in the game's design and direction. So yeah, there wasn't much that was going to overhead budget either. So we had like 3 3D artists, 2 programmers, me and another game designer. That was, like I just described, most of the team for most of the game's production. And then we got someone who joined us for writing, another for QA. And yeah, that was pretty much it.
So was the only thing you outsourced, was that the soundtrack?
That and sound effects.
And if you can reveal this, is the same composer coming back to do the soundtrack for Outward 2?
Yes. Jean-François is coming
Fantastic.
back, and there are quite a few really, really good pieces in there. And the music from the trailer was actually by him as well.
Right. And then just on the flip side of that, the money the studio takes from the sales of the games. Like, obviously, with games that blow up massively, like, for example, Valheim blew up, Power World blew up, and people go, oh, that's just made like $100 million. There's only 10 people. That means they've got 10 million each. That's not how it works, is it?
It is definitely not how it works. Oh God. Oh God. No.
Obviously, there's a percentage of the revenue that has to go to the platforms, so like Steam. I'm guessing it's the same for like PlayStation and Microsoft. Then you got the cut that obviously goes to the publisher.
Yeah, the
How
lion's
does the
share.
rest of it get split up? Does it get split up? Does it go back into the company? Does it go towards future projects?
I think that in total, we gave maybe $500,000 in bonus across the whole team over the course of the few years that followed the launch, where we had very high liquidity.
So were they based on milestone sales, like when you hit a certain milestone?
It was just like, what can we afford to give? And also, honestly, how much do I want to give myself? And then if I give myself that much, then I should give also X amount to the others. But we mostly reinvested everything that we made. And the degree to which we made money, like, that came as a surprise to even our publisher, because they're not used to a dev being able to emancipate financially from making a deal with them. Like, the deals are structured in a way where the publishers are supposed to always keep control of everything by controlling the money. But when you get that much successful with a game that is so much under budget, then profitability is such a multiple that we still end up being okay. But like, we've got an external investor called Execution Labs. We've got the Canada Media Fund that was involved as well. We got a publisher, and we've got the Steam stores. So at the end of the day, like, what was left for us was really just that somewhat small fraction of the total of units sold. And also complicating the matter was that there were retail copies of the game, and those retail copies, like, we barely see a cent.
Yeah.
At the end of it all, it's just like when you're selling books as an author, like, what you make per book sold is kind of ridiculously small. It's a bit like that when it comes to retail copies of a game through a publisher, especially since we were not a full price title, but the cost of goods is the same. Like, printing a disc and having a box costs as much if your game is $50 or if it's $90, right?
Yep.
So in our case, like, I still wanted to do it. I still wanted to go physical because we had so much to prove, and it would just give us some perceived legitimacy if you see the box of the game when you're going in at EB Games, when EB Games was a thing.
Yeah, so I took a lot away from the Business of Video Games podcast that you did about your mentality on publishers. You have now gone on to start your own publishing as well. So I'm assuming that Outward 2 is going to be published by yourselves. You said that publishers are what developers look to as risk mitigation, making sure the game hits the target audience. The financial aid is obviously a big one. What you said about publishers that do the recoup thing where they spend X amount and then they've got to get X squared back before the developers start getting the money back. And I can't remember what the phrase was that you said following that, but it was along the lines of, if that is reduced, you'll attract more developers, you'll give more developers more opportunity. Why don't publishers do that? Because what I liken that to myself in a very basic video game analogy is selling things on the auction house in World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy. You can go for the really big sale that sells for 1 million gold, but only sells once a week. Or you can sell something that sells for 1,000 gold,
a million times a week. Like, so why don't publishers have that mentality? Would it be
Very
too much
simple.
work for them to take on?
It's simpler than that. How many publishers are there? How many game studios are there?
Is
Who
it just
has
that
the
there's
balance
more?
of power? It's that simple. They do it because they can, and they can because getting loans is usually a non-starter for any digital business. And then getting VC money is only possible if you are into the super hustler mentality and going some trend chasing or stuff like that. Like you need to be able to, I don't know, say, oh, here's my NFT game made with AI, give me money. Like that's how you get VC money, or like with promise that you're making a platform, not just a game. Like it's about user counts and not about having a sensible, profitable use case. They're in there to make 25x their investment with a 90% failure rate rather than make a game that seems like, yeah, if I put X money, I'm probably gonna make X plus Y. That's sensible. I'm gonna do it. So at the end of the day, publishers are the main source of funding for games. And that makes game developers in general very desperate. They will accept terms that will kill them. Not like last week, I had a conversation with someone who was just about to sign a deal that he knows is essentially a death sentence for his studio. Because he felt like, yeah, that's a death sentence, but in X more months than just right now if I don't sign it.
Yeah.
And the truth of it is, negotiating harder, like if he dared, could be the difference between signing a death sentence and having a lifeboat. But devs don't even feel that they have the power to negotiate. Luckily for me, I'm super arrogant. And when I negotiate with publishers, my thinking is, well, they've got like 600 pitches last month, and they're still talking to me 6 months later saying that they want to sign me. They see value in me. And if they
Yes.
see value in me, I have
I'm worth
leverage.
something. Yeah.
And if I have leverage, I'm going to use it, or else they will fucking squish me on the floor. So I just have a different mindset in that regard than the vast majority of people managing game businesses. Because the truth is, most people who start a studio, they're passionate about games more than they are about business. In my case, I always loved both.
So with the publishing section of your company now, how's that working? Do you have a completely separate team working on it? Are you working it on like with yourself? How does that split the studio between development and publishing?
Well, the truth is, publishing can be done with a very slim team, or it can be done with a lot of people. And when I look at companies like Team 17 and Devolver or Hooded Horse, those publishers have somewhat limited teams. And they seem to be able to sell a lot of units. And then there are companies that are gigantic and that can't really move the needle all that much. So I think that understanding the market and understanding the medium and understanding what is currently happening rather than what has historically worked, like that is worth so much more than raw manpower. And a lot of companies have just grown for the sake of growing, and they've got like a lot of people who are just getting the paycheck, and they're not incentivized to be successful. But if you're in a much smaller team, if it fails, you will feel responsible for that failure because you're like one of the 3 or 4 or 5 or maybe 10 people involved in the process. So a lot of the playing will be on you if it fails, right?
So they
When
care
I
more.
signed God Factory, Bandai Namco had 12 regional teams trying to push the game. And they honestly could not do more than what I did on my own part-time while also designing the game and running a business.
Fair enough. If it works, it works.
It did work, but it didn't work that much more with them than it did with me back then, you know? So our current publishing team is kind of slim. Like it's me doing mostly like strategy and editorial decisions. Then we've got Mathieu, who joined the team like 7 months ago, I think, who's our marketing specialist. Like he just takes care of
That's
most of
what
the like
yeah.
data analysis, trying to find out the right entry points, making connections with the first parties and all that, and trying to seize opportunities for those live events. Should we go on the PC gaming show going on during Gamescom? Should we try to do something during not E3? Should we try to get a spot at the Game Awards show? All of those questions just answered by one person. Then we've got someone doing assets and community management, aside from me, because I do most of the community management that is not from our moderators, who are volunteers. And then we've got Natasha, who's our director of operation, our COO, and she handles operations both for the studio and for the publishing side of things. And then we've got our team of dev support, which do QA, but they do also other things to help. Like we use them internally, but we're going to lend them as well to help the studios that we sign. And then we've got an external producer. So someone who's just like keeping touch with the team of the games that we're publishing, making sure that they've got everything they need, that they are on time. And if not, to find solutions and to inform us of their situation and make sure that everything is fine. Honestly, that's it. Anything else, we're just going to hire agencies and grow our team as we find more people. Right, we've got Alexi, who just joined, who's gonna do the more like the video assets. And yeah, everything else is just outsourced. And you know, when you work with most publishers, they will claim of all that expertise they have, but most of them, all they do is hire the same firms that you can hire yourself. But then you're signing a gigantic finder's fee.
So I did hear that you have attributed quite a bit some of your success of Outward to the exclusive trailers. I think you said IGN published.
I think it's something that helped, yeah.
Yeah. So what is the benefits of having a media outlet have exclusive trailers rather than giving the same trailer to many outlets?
Well, if we think of what is my reach when I say, hey, this game is good?
Yeah.
It's not much, right? If we give exclusive access to an outlet that has a lot of reach and they've got access to a lot of titles, if they say this game looks good, it's just more believable and more people hear it because they're not as incentivized to think that it's good than the people making it or selling it. And that exclusivity means that they want to push it because they've got this unfair advantage over competing outlets, right? And so without even having to spend anything for that exclusivity, we are gaining way more out of it. So there's this matter of like, okay, we've got this shiny thing. How do we make the most value out of having it? And they're just going to push it for us.
So moving on from that, what is your sort of, I know you're probably quite a way away from it. Do you have any form of marketing strategy for Outward 2 in mind? And what about for your upcoming title, is Lost in Prayer?
Yeah, so obviously a strategy that works for one doesn't work for the other. Anything I reveal about our marketing strategy will possibly lower its efficacy.
Fair enough.
We have to be careful in that regard. One thing for sure is that what worked for Outward 1 won't necessarily work for the second one. The game industry has changed a lot since 2019. Traditional press and games have lost almost all of its relevance in terms of like who is really following that, like having your game showcased by every outlets like GameSpot and IGN or Kotaku and Polygon or whatever, it doesn't seem to be impacting sales as much anymore. And even Twitch, which used to be the one thing you wanted for a while, seems to have lost a lot of its weight. YouTube is very central nowadays. Yes. So we're obviously going to focus a lot of our efforts there. It's a lot harder to get free coverage nowadays. So we need to be very clever in how we sponsor people to cover the game, and like being smart about how we do that. Like if X dude, Y dude, and Z dude are covering the game, even if it's sponsored, if it works well and they've got a lot of engagement from that, then others will follow suit even for free. But like what kickstarts the machine seems to be more and more who you pay and what kind of a video did you get out of it. I know that like one of the measure of success for sponsoring Twitch streamers is a lot like you pay them for 1 or 2 hours, and if they keep playing, they see it as like the free stuff, but it means more like it's a gamble. If you just get 1 or 2 hours, you didn't gain anything really from it. But if they kept playing for 6, 7 hours after that because they enjoyed the experience, now you're starting to get the real value out of it. But the fact that the value of your streaming, of your sponsored stream, is a gamble in itself is super scary. So yeah, then it's just like how do we stand out? I think in the long term, that I can say, what I care most about is about sophisticated gamers. Like I said, that's our target audience. And so how do we reach out to them specifically? And the answer is if they come to us. And for now, that's our Discord server. That's our, I would say, our most valuable asset. I hate calling it like that, but it is what it is. If we're just talking in the marketing brain thing, like having direct access to them and them having direct access to me is the most valuable thing for 9dots, because we can understand each other and I can get that real sense of, are we like on the pulse of our audience's desires? And we can test out things from people who, if we keep delivering, if we keep giving them what they want, well, then eventually they'll trust us for more and more. I say that. They'll trust us even if we get further away from what they came for initially. And Lost in Prayer is a very good test of that. Lost in Prayer is a very different game to like an action open world RPG like Outward. Now we're talking turn-based, grid-based. It's not based on immersion the same way that an open world RPG is. A lot of the design qualities that were appreciated in Outward are found in Lost in Prayer. And I know that only a fraction of the audience of the first one will go to the second. But if they do appreciate it, and if they are part of our Discord server, if they are part of the conversation of that group, that community that we're willing to say, yeah, you know, you should try Lost in Prayer, I liked it. They might not believe it the first time. They'll be like, yeah, okay, good for you. But if they keep hearing it, and then they try another game from us, like they try Witherbloom, and they liked it maybe just as much as Outward, well then, okay, maybe I should try Lost in Prayer as well. So I'm really into it for the more long-term vision of, I want to earn the trust of our players, and I'll focus on not disappointing them and delivering the same qualities over and over again, but in a variety of genres and experience. And we'll see how that goes. And that is the core of the marketing strategy. But that's not the same as ads or sponsored streams or YouTube. And there's a strategy of it, like we want that, but then there's a tactic that for now has to be just building around that thing, because we don't have yet proven that we deserve that trust, because we only had this one game in most cases. Like we've got some people who came from God Factory, but most people who discovered 9dots discovered us through Outward. And so they have just had this one game, and their only expectation is, please make another one. Okay, we're doing that. But hey, while you're waiting, look at this shiny new thing that you didn't think you might want.
I mean, I like being made to think in games. I like in Outward, you have to, well, I've got to do this before I even think about setting off to do what I want to do. And even then, there's a chance that I might not get to do it because something previous is going to screw that up for me. In Lost in Prayer, it's very much the same. You could get to a boss that you could quite easily beat, or a creature you could quite easily beat, but you're like, what if I want to play as it? Am I going to let myself die so I can play as that? I think it's amazing. Got some questions for Outward 2. I'm not.
We'll see if I am willing to answer.
If you can, even if it's not a full answer, is it going to be set in the same world, or is it going to be? Yep.
Oh yeah, it's set. It's 50 years after the events from Outward 1.
And
it's in the same world. It's in Ori, but it is entirely in different regions of Ori. So Berg still exists, Harmattan still exists, but we're not visiting those areas.
And what were your big takeaways from Outward? Not necessarily the successes, but the failures as well, that you want to either implement or change.
Yeah.
Moving into Outward 2.
There's a lot of criticism for Outward that is just like, yeah, that's on purpose, right?
Yes.
Like, we made a game where either you like that or you don't, and we're not trying to do something for both. But there's a lot of criticism that we agree with, and that it was either through lack of experience or most often because we lack the means to do something better or more intricate. The combat system is an example. I'm very proud of the combat system of Outward 1, but it is not for everyone, and it requires a lot of deliberation. And I did say that Outward is about immersion. The combat system of Outward 1 is not immersive because it's not realistic that you need to make a decision like 3 seconds before the hit is landed, right?
Yep.
So Outward 2, we've put a lot of effort into making a combat system that is extremely responsive. And that means a lot of work as well, by the way. So you can cancel your attacks with much more generous windows, and you can blend one move into another so that very seamlessly you can combine things together. And we've added dual wielding where very seamlessly you can change what you're doing from one hand to the other. We can dodge cancel and block cancel most of animations. So once again, like if I were to attack and I want to block almost at the same time, like I can do that in real life. Why couldn't I in the game, right? We just thought of those little things, and I wanted something that is more of a nervous playstyle. I really like the dodging in Neo, so I was inspired by that, by having like you've got step dodges, because in real life you wouldn't like avoid a sword by rolling on the floor. You would just step out. So we've got that. You can just step out, but if you press twice, then you transform your step dodge into a dodge roll. So those are the kind of tweaks that we're doing. The other aspect is a lot of people said there's no story or that the story doesn't matter in Outward, and I find that extremely sad because the game does have a story. It has a good story, but it is very fragmented because it's told across 3 different storylines. And that in itself is a big obstacle to appreciating it because it might seem very incomplete if you don't do the different storylines. But also, our narrative delivery was not on the same level as the story we're trying to tell. We didn't have cutscenes, we didn't have much in terms of motions and actions from the players as they talk. It was mostly text boxes with very limited voiceovers. And so because we didn't have a lot of tools to tell a story, people will imagine, oh, but they didn't focus on that and that's fine. But the truth is, no, there is a story there. There is a very fleshed out world. So in Outward 2, we decided to focus on having, like we're going to have more intricate dialogue systems with like some zoom ins and more dynamic cameras and some cutscenes and stuff like that. It's going to be more like every quest dialogue will be voiced from start to finish rather than just being a small segment. So we're really improving in that regard so that people won't say that we didn't try to deliver a good story and that it was an afterthought, because it wasn't. Another aspect was that they felt the world was very empty. And I described the technical constraints that we had from doing a split screen for a game like this, but with more time, more budget, more experience. Now we're trying to add more into our outdoor areas so that they feel more fleshed out. And we're doing the same with our cities. And one core feature that I'm really excited about is the full year calendar. So like in real time, as you play, you get the change of seasons, and you'll have some events that are specific to like where you are at in terms of, is it winter? Yeah. Well, then you can go to that place that you cannot during summer, for instance, and stuff like that. So it will feel more alive. It's not just going to be like walking in something that feels very still, aside from a handful of encounters along the way. What else? Oh yeah, and the last big thing that we wanted to improve on was character creation. Man, our characters are ugly. Those faces, those potato faces, they haunt us. And
You
like
played
that
on
was
that on social media. I love those shorts.
Yeah, I mean, we know. You think we did that on purpose? No, it's just we did what we could with what we had, and the experience we had both for character modeling, but also like the limitations of, we're not going to do different models for just the head and then the rest of the body and all that. And we were never zooming in on those faces anyway, so it wasn't all that important. So it was just like choosing our battles. But after the success of Outward, now we'll have no excuse if it's still like on that level. So we have not revealed much, but I know that when we're gonna show what is involved in our character creation, that alone will convince a lot of people to buy the game.
Well, when you're playing the game, you're staring at the back of your head for 90% of the game anyway.
Yeah, and in our case, you're looking at a backpack.
What were the challenges with Outward taking it from PC to console?
So the biggest problem really is that because we don't have a lot of programmers, it's a very big chunk of our team dedicated to just that. Most of the porting was done by one guy. But that's one guy, like considering that we had like most for Outward One, we had mostly like 2 programmers, and we've got the ports done by an external studio once we signed with the publisher.
Yeah.
But then for Definitive Edition and for Stadia, we decided to do it in-house. And that was like way more trouble than we would have wanted. Because essentially we went from not doing PlayStation 4 and Xbox One to doing Xbox Series and PlayStation 5. So on one side was new hardware, so we could start fresh. But at the same time, if we had done PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, there's so much we would have learned there, would have applied to the new consoles as well. So yeah, it was just like having to start kind of from scratch to do it internally. That was difficult. And then there's a Switch port that was also done externally, but that we've supported a lot ourselves with our QA and our producer and all that. And it just dragged on. Like porting on the Xbox Series and PlayStation 5 is a breeze compared to porting it to what is essentially 2 cell phones taped together. So yeah, like Sneaky Box is the studio that did the Switch port, and it was a struggle, like way harder than what they anticipated themselves. But we knew when we hired them that they were underestimating the challenges, and so we just kept supporting them as much as we could. But eventually we got there. But with like, we know that the Switch version looks very rough. But given what you know now on the technical constraints of making even just the game run on PlayStation 4.
Yeah. So are you able to reveal what platforms Outward 2 will be on?
Not yet.
Not yet, no. And you just mentioned QA. So when it comes to QA, obviously you've got your own internal QA. How much do you find developers in general listen, and how much do you listen as a studio? So when you go to like the closed alpha access, the closed beta, the open betas, one, is it surprising the amount of bugs that the everyday player finds, and how important is the feedback that they give in regard not only to bugs but general game progression, like what they like, what they don't like? Obviously you said that Outward was intended to be XYZ, and if you don't like XYZ, you're not going to like the game. It's
Yeah.
not a bug. It's an intended. It's a feature.
So the question is a bit complicated
Yes.
because I have yet to be surprised by how people react to the games that we make once they play them. To me, the biggest question is whether or not they're going to play it. Once they do, their reactions are usually in line with the different scenarios that I had already in. So there's a bit of a sanity check, and then, okay, which of those scenarios in my head is what's going to happen? Will most people like it? Will most people dislike it for that feature? And then overall, is it going to be something they want, or are we just completely out of the loop and we're not resonating with the public at all? Those are the biggest questions. And then you just validate over time. Is feedback, like, I'm not saying that all feedback is ignored, because that's not true. It's more that the devil is in the details.
Yes.
And what matters is not finding out whether or not we were right or wrong on that specific thing, because we were intentional. It's more when we're surprised, or rather, when they are confronted with issues that we would not have thought of. Like, oh, if I have this intent, I wanted to role play as that kind of character, and my only choices are this, this, and that, I'm disappointed. Now, that is something that is more valuable to act on than, I want mounts in Outward, I don't want to be walking around so much. Which is, to me, like, okay, you want mounts? Well, running from one corner to the next of the outdoor region takes literally less than 6 minutes. If we had mounts, you're just gonna zip through the content within like less than a half an hour, stuff that right now just keeps you busy for hours. You'd think you want that, but you don't, because the implication of adding mounts would be like having
Halving the game
so
time.
much more surface to cover. And also, I think that a lot of developers are just reacting to feedback and taking everything at face value and kind of forgetting the vision they had, or worse yet, they just asked themselves, wouldn't it be cool if? And then they did that, and then people react and like, oh, I didn't think of that. I didn't think of this, and then they just like start obeying, and they treat the game like a product rather than as a creative and artistic expression. So I would argue that the more you let the community shape what you make, the less artistic it is.
That makes sense.
So there is such a thing as a spectrum of art versus product. Like, it's not either or. And Outward is very much intended as like it needs to be commercially viable because we're pouring millions in there, right? So we're not going at it like completely out of the blue. We're making educated guess of, okay, we're gonna do this. 70% of the people won't like it, but the 30% of the people who like it, they will like it enough that they want to pay for it. That's the bet. Now, when you do a playtest, are you actually validating that? Who is playtesting your game? The people who won't like it, or the people who will? To what ratio? Is the comments that you're receiving now making you do something that could push away the part of the public you're targeting that just wasn't there then? At the end of the day, you have to trust your own instincts. You have to be a creator. You have to have intentionality. Artistic integrity is one of the qualities that will define if a game is worth money, in my opinion. Like, I have external shareholders. They don't like that I think like this.
They must have known what they were
that they
getting
don't
in
like
for.
it. I understand that they don't like it. Like, I had a talk like that just like 2 days ago where they were asking me, yeah, you need to make Outward like early access, and before that you need to have all those open betas, and you need to just make sure that you're doing everything that they want with the feedback to make sure that it's going to be a hit. I get where they're coming from, But we already have so many things that we want to do with that game. And if we deviate from our current intention just to address feedback to something that is not even finished yet, then are we really gaining something? In some cases, yes. In other cases, no. Because maybe that if we had done that thing that we haven't done yet, they would not have a complaint about this other thing because it'd be too excited about the thing that we've delivered. But it's still in development. And so the degree of execution of every feature is still like none went from A to Z. And that shapes how it is perceived. And what we take as valuable feedback is going to change depending on where we're at with every single feature, but also for the whole, it's a whole mess. It's a whole mess to think about. It's worth it. It's stimulating, and we're going to do some playtests, and we're going to gather some feedback, but only when we feel the time is right for us, and also in an honest and transparent manner. We're only going to do it when we know that we can address the feedback and that it's not just performative, that it's not just a marketing beat.
Yes.
Otherwise, it's dishonest.
Are you building Outward 2 in the same engine as Outward 1?
Nope. We shifted from Unity to Unreal. That was a fucking pain. God, it was painful. It still is painful. Like we spent 10 years with Unity, but they're really screwed up.
Which version of Unreal are you using?
5.
So just a few more things before we start to wrap up here. I got a couple of questions from the Tavern community, one of which you've sort of already answered halfway through the episode. So if there's anything else you'd like to expand on, it's from Iridium. Will you be making combat any less clunky, which you said you have been? It's fun, but the rigidness is a turn off for some. Is there anything more you can add to that? Any more mechanics to combat that you haven't covered that you'd be willing to share?
Not really. The only thing I can say is I agree that it was very stiff, and it's just not anymore. It's barely recognizable in terms of game feel. Like, we actually worry internally. We've had some designers who wondered, like, okay,
Is it
maybe
now
it's
too
not
fluid?
out. Is it still outward now that it feels good?
And maybe, like, I don't know if you can answer this, but if you can, fantastic. Are there going to be any new types of weapons, or are you sticking with the ones you had in Outward 1?
There's going to be some new types.
And then the second question, do you have any plans to make multiplayer a larger focus? For example, either larger parties or cross-platform?
So
Again,
cross-platform.
only if you can answer this.
Yeah, cross-platform in itself is less a technological issue than a matter of, like, can we deal with first parties and make it happen? We're not going to do PvP, that's for sure, because everything has to be so tight with PvP. Like, if I play against a creature with my friend, the creature doesn't exist, it cannot be frustrated. So if it attacks my friend, but in their version of the game, because of synchronicity issue, the enemy didn't touch it, but I see that he touched my friend, and then there's no HP loss. Me, I'm happy my friend didn't get hit.
That's
My
a win.
friend is happy he didn't get hit. And the enemy doesn't care. If I do PvP,
You're going to
it's not
start
the
to
same
care.
reality at all. And so all of a sudden, everything has to be like by the microsecond, everything has to be so tight, or else it's such a source of frustration. Yeah, there's just a lot of implications. And when it comes to game balance as well, sometimes making something that works in PvP as well means making something that's not fun anymore, just to make it fair. Yeah, so, and when it comes to lobbies and party system and everything, we are still a small studio. I don't want to spend time and energy moderating people and making sure that they behave like adults. I did say that we're targeting sophisticated gamers, people who've been playing for 20 years. We just
Doesn't
wanted
mean
to
we're gonna
figure
behave
out
like
who
adults.
they party with. Like, if you want to find people to play with instead of having lobbies and such, join our Discord server or ask your friends. And that way, like, griefers will only be a problem for people who just decided to trust just about anybody. but they will have like exposed themselves consciously to a problematic person. Whereas if we start doing lobbies and such, we're just making it easier for bad actors to piss off people who just want to have a good time. And any time we spend on that problem is time spent out of making the game better. Fuck that.
Yeah. And then I have 3 questions for you, just before we finish up. First question is sort of a 2-in-1. What was the first game you played that got you into, like, for example, the RPG MMO genre? And what RPG game would you recommend to someone that sort of goes under the radar? I mean, everyone's heard of Final Fantasy, everyone's heard of Dragon Quest, everyone's heard of Dragon Age. What for you is a good RPG that is still playable in these times that people don't appreciate?
Okay, so first game that got me into RPGs was Final Fantasy 1. Like I just rented that game when I didn't even know how to read yet, and that game was in English. And so just the fact that a small kid with like just on his own would rent the game and kill off Garland, like the first version, not the final boss.
Yep.
And cross that bridge without understanding a single line of English in itself, I feel is kind of a special achievement.
Oh, 100%. That's awesome.
But I can name quite a few. Baldur's Gate 2 was
Shadows of Am.
massive for me. It was just, it shaped me as a role-playing fan.
I'm assuming you have
Fantasy-
played Baldur's Gate 3.
I have not played it much. I've got maybe 20 hours.
How did you feel when they announced
I'm sad because I don't like it. I don't like Baldur's Gate 3, but it just doesn't have the qualities of Baldur's Gate 2. It has its own qualities.
I understand that.
It has its own qualities, but Baldur's Gate 2 was so important, and God, and I'm sure I'm gonna go back to Baldur's Gate 3, but
I'm just so glad they brought Boo and Minsk back to Baldur's Gate 3.
I mean, that's one reason for me to keep going, I guess. But yeah, so Baldur's Gate 2 was big. Final Fantasy 1 was my first was my gateway drug. Final Fantasy 7 is like I know a lot of people say that, but it is in my top 3 games of all time. But from there I started exploring, and I want to talk of like the catalog in general of Squaresoft back in the PlayStation 1 era. Like anything that had Squaresoft written on the box was worthy of being bought. Parasite, Vagrant Story, Legend of Mana, Sega Frontier. God, so many amazing games. And then, that's really funny. I was working in a factory for a summer job, and there was this guy that almost never talked with me. He was my foreman, and he just asked me out of the blue when we were bored, like, "So, Guillaume, do you play video games?" Hey, maybe. What if I do? And then we started talking, and he just said, I used to play a lot of video games, but I don't think I need to do that anymore. Now I just have this one game that is everything for me. Huh? He said, like, once you play that game, you don't need to play other games. It's called Morrowind.
Mine was the same one.
And I was like, huh. And he just started talking about those systems where you just wanted to play a guy who's a monk and like he just needs to punch things in the face and doesn't need to wear armor. And that's just because he decided to level those things. And we're like, that sounds really funky. And the box of Morrowind, like there was nothing. It was just written Morrowind on it.
Morrowind.
Okay, so if you didn't know, you didn't know. And I just trusted the guy, rented the game, and then I returned the game. And I went to buy my own copy because fuck that, I'm not renting that game, I'm buying that game. Of course, it's the most amazing thing ever. And,
I was buying, I think it was one of the Final Fantasies, and I remember I was with my mum at the supermarket, like just a grocery store that happens to sell video games as well. And the guy on the checkout goes, "Have you ever played Morrowind?" And like he was talking to me for the good 20 minutes or so. He was scanning the shopping, and I picked it up the next week.
Yeah. And that
And
game was
never
so
looked
much
back.
more than everything could have been told. And of course, Morrowind was maybe the most important influence on Outward's design. And there's this video by Reddit Oscar where he just compared the two, and there is no greater compliment than to compare my tiny little game, Outward, please like it, to Morrowind. And for the other question, like, what is something that people might not have played that is still approachable today? For now, without hesitation, my answer would be Romancing Saga 2, who got a remake not too long ago. If you're really, like, if you're experienced in JRPGs, that game is just so much bigger and so much more complete and complex and filled with hidden secrets and possibilities. I don't think there's a single person who can say they know everything about Romancing Saga 2. And usually when there's a remake, the things they change are less good than the original, right? Looking at you, Final Fantasy VII Remake. But Romancing Saga 2 is the greatest remake of all time. Because they addressed some of the... It's a bit like Outward, where there were things about the premise of the game that meant that it would have some flaws. So, spoiler alert, in Romancing Saga 2, you play multiple generations. But that means that you cannot be all that attached to your characters, because eventually you play the next line of characters.
Yeah.
You reform your whole party multiple times throughout one playthrough. And that means you get to try so many cool builds and team formation and everything. There's just so much to explore. But your characters are kind of bland. And so the story in itself kind of feels like just an excuse to explore its systems and mechanics. Well, in the remake, they couldn't make the characters have more personality, but they made a more complex story for the antagonists that you follow through the whole story. And so now the characters that you learn to discover are the enemies that you're chasing after. That is fucking genius. That is wonderful. And Joe, it just sets the table better for one of the most ambitious, most systemic, most toy box, sandboxy experience of all time. And they just brought in a package that is like addressing so much of the quality of life issues that the game had, because it was a Super Nintendo game, Japan only. And now we've got this version that has addressed its single most important weakness, which is that narratively it felt dry. And they just added quality of life and better graphics and more accessible. And what's crazy is, like, we're talking about a game that is top down, which is, you know, those tile sets to make towns and such. And they just made replicas of that, but in 3D. But like the first time I went out and looked at the city, I recognized it. But from this perspective of being in third person, there's such the attention to detail, the love, the passion that went into, like, the respect for the original content. If you like yourself, you must play Romancing Saga 2.
I will
It's
give it a
amazing.
try. It's been on my watch list. I haven't got round to it yet. So
I got the writer for Outward one. Like, I got him to play it, and he's going crazy over it.
So, second question, what game, two most current games that you're playing, one within the RPG MMO genre and then one outside it?
I just finished my, I don't know, maybe 25th game of Age of Wonders 4. It's my favorite 4X game of all time. I've got like 900 hours on it, and it was released in 2023. So you can make a quick calculation there.
Someone's been playing during work hours.
And I just started Avow, so that's an RPG. Yes. And I'm kind of swapping between Caves of Kut and Avow. Those are the two RPGs that will keep me busy for a while. I'm saying that thinking, yeah, but what about Metaphor that I'm like maybe halfway through? So many RPGs, man.
There's too many to play.
I would say too many. I want more.
Right. And then,
I'm okay with having too much.
yep. Right, and then sort of the out of the box question, the 9 dots question, if you would. If you could take an NPC from any RPG or MMO game and go out on a date or an activity, who would it be, and what would you do?
That you need to realize, well, probably you probably do realize. I've played a lot of RPGs, so
Yeah,
there's a
there are
lot of characters
so
on my
many.
mind. And some of the answers I don't want to say because they'd be spoilers. And I don't want to spoil anyone with that stuff. God, I would need to pick a woman, that's for sure. I mean, if we're talking about dates, I guess that date with Ares and the Gold Saucer looked fun. I guess I could go for that. I could try to replicate an experience like this. But
Let's transpose it to a real life activity.
okay, you know what? I tried to find one really kick-ass warrior type and
Yeah.
have them help me inform the design on combat in our games.
There we go.
There you go.
That's a very good choice.
It would make me a better game developer. So that maybe I could okay, how would you do this? Yeah, so I'd find a very accomplished warrior type character.
Rig the motion capture up.
Yeah, something like that. Let's go.
Well, have you got any closing thoughts, remarks, or anything you wish to say? Obviously, you do have your Lost in Prayer coming up. The demo's out on Steam now. Been out for a little
The demo is still out. If there's really one action point, it would be Lost in Prayer is still rough, but like we were talking about feedback and all that, right now, the feedback we receive for the game is definitely something we can act on before release. So if there's anyone who's curious about when we take our design mentality and apply that to a roguelike, yeah, that's one thing where people can help us shape a better experience. Making such an intentional game as Outward is a different thing than a roguelike, where a roguelike, it's so many interlocking systems. And for a roguelike to be good, it has to contain stuff that we, the devs, did not even think the players would do. And in that case, playtests become very valuable.
Yeah,
So,
I must say,
it would be my closing thoughts is if you guys wanna just see what 9dots is about, if you want to have a clearer picture of who we are as a dev, one game cannot be enough to know us, but from the moment you've played 2 of our games, you can start making associations. Yeah.
Yep. I must say, that is one thing I did notice. It stuck out to me a lot whilst I was watching you play the demo on stream, is that you were taking feedback, asking questions to the audience, and seemingly giving it straight to the developers there and then. You're making notes, and it's just it really, really stood out. It's like you care a lot, not only about the game but about the people that play it. And I'm sure some of the feedback that was given is not going to be implemented for one reason or another. But you wrote it all down.
Yep. It will be even if we don't do it, doesn't mean we don't consider it. And sometimes feedback is useful not for that game but for the next one. If people want a game with mounts, it cannot be Outward with mounts.
No.
But maybe we can make Outward-ish with mounts and then make something that makes everyone happy. So yeah, we do care, we do listen, and if it doesn't affect the game, it can affect the artists and the next game.
That is that for this episode. Obviously, all the links for everything are going to be down below or up above, depending on whatever platform you're listening or watching on. So that's a wrap for this episode of Side Quests and Save Points. Huge thanks to Guillaume for joining me today. It is not every day you get to chat with someone that willingly makes a game where getting lost is a feature and not a bug. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to check out 9dots Studio. Links to their Discord, both for the Outward Discord, their 9dots Discord, will be in the description below. And if you've got strong opinions about quest markers, survival mechanics, or why we put ourselves through brutally hard RPGs, please come and tell us in the Tavern Discord. We're always up for a good discussion or group therapy session, whichever one is more applicable. Next podcast episode, we'll be joined by Joseph here. He is a content creator, someone who's also recently discovered Pokemon. Despite growing up in the time of it, he never got round to playing it, so we'll make that a good discussion and see why some people don't consider Pokemon a JRPG when it theoretically is. So until then, stay safe, keep an eye on your stamina bar, and remember, if you don't know where you're going, you're probably already on an adventure. So see you next time.